Good evening from New York. Former Vice President Cheney finally out with an explanation tonight for his unprecedented attacks on the current administration. Our fifth story on the countdown, Mr. Cheney and the other fresh new face co-leading the GOP, and Mr. Limbaugh, whose amazing triple header today we'll get to in a moment. First, Dick Cheney, claiming to be looking out for the little guy. If by little guy you mean Dick Cheney. In a new interview with his biographer, Mr. Cheney, pretending to be a great hero, shoveling high and deep his rationale for speaking out against President Obama, quoting him, "I went through the Iran-Contra hearings and watched the way administration officials ran for cover and left the little guys out to dry. And I was bound and determined that wasn't going to happen this time. Except when it's in his self-interest to send the little guys to jail." Exhibit A, Abu Ghraib. Deputy Defense Secretary Paul Wolfowitz infamously dismissing the torture that took place there as the work of, quote, a few bad apples. 7 soldiers having been charged and convicted of dereliction of duty, maltreatment, aggravated assault, and battery. 2 of them, Specialist Lindy England, Specialist Charles Grainer, sentenced to 3 years and 10 years in prison, respectively. Grainer, little guy, is still in there. But never mind those little guys. Mr. Cheney claiming to protect other little guys who wrote the legal memos justifying torture's use. You know, the grunts, like the poor laboring man barely eking out a living as a federal judge. Quote, "And this time around, I'll do my damnedest to defend anybody out there, be they in the agency carrying out the orders or the lawyers who wrote the opinions. Those who are late will not get fruit cup." That the former vice president is speaking out at all, putting him at odds even with former President Bush, who has remained silent, saying that President Obama, quote, deserves my silence. Dick Cheney also opening his mouth simply because he feels like it. Quote, "I have strong feelings about what happened and what we did or didn't do and what's happening now. And I don't have any reason not to forthrightly express those views." Time now to call in our own Howard Fineman, senior Washington correspondent for Newsweek magazine. Howard, good evening.
Hi, Keith.
So where was Vice President Cheney's concern for this theoretical little guy when the abuses of Abu Ghraib came to light? Why didn't he set Mr. Wolfowitz straight when he claimed it was the work of a few bad apples, in other words, a few bad little guys?
Well, that's a good question. You talked about the bad apples. It was Dick Cheney who planted the tree, the entire tree. But the reason he didn't is the way he operated. This was a guy who was basically taking over the White House, taking over many of the powers of the presidency. He didn't want that to be immediately obvious, and he didn't want to be the front man for the policies that he himself was instilling in the administration that he was running from behind the curtain. So he was operating in the shadows. He remained that way, and now, ironically, he's out from behind the curtain to try to justify what he was doing behind it all those years.
The lawyers who wrote the opinions, the Judge Jay Bybes and the John Hughes, with the less, if not unseen hand of David Addington, by what standard would anybody consider them little guys?
Well, they aren't. They were key to the whole process because during the Bush administration, in the early days and the later days, there were attempts, however serious or half-hearted you want to call them, to write legal justifications and examinations of the torture policies and the harsh measures they were taking in Abu Ghraib and elsewhere. These guys were indispensable. They were crucial to the whole thing. Some people say because we wanted to follow the rule of law, even in the Bush administration. Other people would say it's because they wanted to pretend to do so. Either way, those two guys were as indispensable to the whole thing as indeed Dick Cheney himself.
So who is Cheney talking about? Who does he mean by little guys? Because it's obviously it's not the interrogators, because President Obama has said essentially that the I was just following orders defense will be valid for them. He's not. There's no consideration of prosecuting them. Who are the little guys in Cheney's opinion?
Well, it might be those lawyers. It might be some other people who are being questioned in other places about their role in approving waterboarding, for example, which by general consensus is considered to be torture. I mean, no less an authority than Richard Land of the Southern Baptist Convention, a huge, important part and leader of the Bush years, came out with a statement today saying that it was torture. So that's probably who Cheney's talking about. But interestingly enough, somebody like Scooter Libby, he's the biggest of the little guys. And there's some people who think that even though Dick Cheney made a show in the last day of arguing for a full pardon for Scooter, there are things that he could have done early on, Cheney, that is, to have short-circuited the whole thing if he really wanted to man up.
Last part, the political component here. You've got a Republican Party desperately trying to find something, anything to identify itself with. And Mr. Cheney is sucking the air out of their room. And I know you'll say he doesn't care. But is there no one in his party to say you damn well better care? It's our party now?
Apparently not. Maybe Rush Limbaugh.
Yeah.
But Rush Limbaugh isn't going to do it. I think Cheney is trying to make up for what to some extent he really couldn't, given the way he was operating, do when he was in the White House. In other words, he's making retroactively the public justifications that he couldn't because of how he was trying to manipulate things from behind the scenes do when he was on Pennsylvania Avenue. That's fine for him. It's not necessarily good for the party, because if we learn one thing about the last year, it's that the Bush-Cheney presidency was poison in the end for the Republican Party, and whenever Barack Obama might be in trouble politically or the Democrats in trouble politically, they can always raise the specter of Bush and Cheney. George Bush understands that. Dick Cheney doesn't seem to.
Howard Fineman of MSNBC and Newsweek, as always. Howard, great thanks.
Thank you, Keith.
Well,